The Midnight Frost, Volume 1, Chapter 1, The Tenant in the Crawlspace. The winter of 2012 didn't arrive with a gentle dusting of snow. It arrived with a violent, bone-chilling scream of wind that rattled the windows of our two-family Victorian home. My parents had owned the house for a decade, a sprawling, gray-painted structure with wraparound porches and a roof that seemed to sag under the weight of a century's worth of secrets. We lived on the upper level, a maze of hardwood floors and drafty hallways, while the bottom floor was a revolving door for the transient and the lonely. Then came Mark. He arrived on a Tuesday, his battered black pickup truck skidding into the driveway through a slurry of gray slush. He didn't have much, just a few cardboard boxes that looked like they had been soaked and dried a dozen times. Mark was a man of indeterminate age, though my father guessed 35. He had a hollowed-out look, as if someone had taken a melon baller to his cheeks. His eyes were the color of slate, and they never quite settled on you. They always seemed to be looking at something just over your shoulder. "Quiet guy," my father had remarked that evening as we watched Mark haul the last of his boxes into the lower apartment. "The kind of tenant who pays on time and keeps to himself. I like him." I wanted to like him too, but there was something about the way the light in his apartment never seemed to go out. Even at 4 a.m., a sickly yellow glow would bleed from his kitchen window onto the snow outside. By the second week of December, the quiet began to rot. The first thing I noticed were the doors. Our house had heavy oak doors that made a distinct clack thud when closed. Around 2:15 a.m. every night, I would hear Mark's front door open. I'd lie in bed, my breath held, listening to the silence of the winter night. 10 minutes would pass, then the door would shut. Then, 5 minutes later, the back door would open. It was a pattern of aimless nocturnal wandering. I started to imagine him standing out there in the sub-zero temperatures, not smoking, not moving, just staring into the black wall of the pine trees that bordered our property. Then came the voices. It started on the 18th. I was in my room, trying to finish a paper for school. The heat in our house was ancient, a system of vents that acted like a primitive telephone line. If someone whispered in the kitchen downstairs, you could hear the sibilant hiss in the upstairs bathroom. But Mark wasn't whispering. "I didn't tell you to come back," he hissed. His voice was a jagged rasp. "I told you I needed more time. The boy sees too much." I froze. The boy? Was he talking about me? I crept toward the vent, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Get out! Get back under!" Mark screamed. This was followed by a sound that made my skin crawl, like a heavy bag of meat being slammed against the floor joists directly beneath my feet. I told my father the next morning. He went downstairs, played the role of the concerned landlord, and came back up 10 minutes later with a dismissive wave of his hand. "Mark's just stressed, son," said he was having an argument on the phone with his brother. He apologized for the noise. But I knew. Mark hadn't been holding a phone. The acoustics of the vents were perfect. I would have heard the tinny vibrato of a second voice. Mark had been talking to the air, or to the floorboards. Christmas Eve arrived with a deceptive sense of normalcy. The house was filled with the clatter of silverware and the smell of my mother's cinnamon-dusted ham. My Uncle Jake, a man whose laugh was louder than a cannon fire, had been regaling us with stories until he realized he'd left his flip phone in his car. "I'll get it, Jake," I said, eager for a moment of silence. I stepped out the back door. The air was so cold it felt like needles in my lungs. The backyard was a vast, unbroken sheet of white, save for the dark, square silhouette of the tool shed. As I crunched through the snow, I noticed something odd. The door to the hallway, the one that led to the shared basement and Mark's back entrance, was standing wide open. A rectangle of dim, flickering light spilled onto the snow. I detoured. I don't know why. Curiosity is a death sentence in stories like mine. I peered into the hallway. The door to the basement crawl space, a tiny 3-foot-high wooden hatch, was unlatched. I turned my flashlight toward the shed, wanting to finish my errand and get back to the warmth. I stepped into the shed, the scent of motor oil and frozen earth greeting me. "Jake?" I whispered, though I knew he was inside. In the corner, behind a stack of rusted lawn chairs, something moved. A figure arose, unfolding itself like a spider. It was Mark. He wasn't wearing his coat. He was in a thin, tattered undershirt, his skin a translucent, sickly white. In his hand, he held a long, rusted screwdriver. His eyes were no longer slate. They were wide, the pupils blown out until they were nothing but black holes. The boy found the nest," he whispered. He didn't run. He lunged. I moved on pure adrenaline. I backed out of the shed, my heels catching on the threshold. I slammed the heavy wooden door just as his weight hit the other side, with a sickening thud. I didn't wait to hear him scream. I sprinted toward the house, my shoes slipping on the ice, my heart feeling like it was going to explode in my chest. I burst into the kitchen, gasping for air. Mark, in the shed, he tried to... My father was already on his feet, sensing the genuine terror in my voice. He grabbed a heavy flashlight and went out with Uncle Jake. I stayed inside, clutching a steak knife, my eyes glued to the back window. They came back 5 minutes later, breathless. "He's gone," my father said, his face pale. "But son, you need to see this."
Jake?
We went to the crawlspace hatch in the back hallway. My father pulled it open and shone the light inside. It wasn't just a crawlspace. Mark had turned it into a shrine. The dirt floor was covered in stolen blankets from our own linen closet. There were dozens of candles burned down to stubs. And on the walls, the underside of our living room floorboards, were hundreds of photographs. They were of us, me sleeping, my mother reading, my father eating dinner, all taken from the gaps in the floorboards and the vents. But the most terrifying part was the center of the nest. There was a small, hand-carved wooden figure of a boy, dressed in a scrap of fabric that matched the shirt I was wearing that very night. Mark hadn't been living in his apartment. He had been living under us, watching the heat of our lives through the cracks in the wood. The police came, but Mark's truck was already gone. They found his apartment downstairs completely empty. No furniture, no boxes, just a single gift-wrapped box in the center of the living room. Inside was my Uncle Jake's flip phone. It had one new voice message recorded at 11:45 p.m. that night. I played it once. I'll never play it again. It was just the sound of heavy, wet breathing, and then a whisper that sounded like it was coming from inside my own head. "Merry Christmas. I'll see you when the lights go out." Even now, years later, every time I hear a floorboard creak or a vent rattle, I don't think of the wind. I think of the man in the trench coat, standing in the dark, waiting for his chance to come back home.